In August 1982, Kenya was a nation reeling from the chaos of a failed coup attempt. On August 1st, elements of the Kenya Air Force had risen against President Daniel Arap Moi's iron-fisted regime, only to be crushed in a matter of hours. The streets of Nairobi echoed with the crack of gunfire and the wail of sirens. But the real storm was yet to come, a wave of arrests that would ensnare anyone suspected of disloyalty. Among them was Raila Amolo Odinga, a 37-year-old engineer and son of the legendary opposition figure Jaramogi Odinga. Raila had played only a peripheral role in the events, quietly advocating for change through mass mobilization rather than violence. But in Moi, Kenya, suspicion was guilt enough. On August 11th, Raila was at the home of his friend, Professor Oki Ambika, in Nairobi's Caledonia estate, seeking refuge amid the growing paranoia. Unbeknownst to him, his driver had been intercepted at his Kileleshwa residence and coerced into leading the authorities straight to him. A squad of special branch officers, the regime's dreaded secret police, burst in without warning. Raila was handcuffed, blindfolded, and bundled into a waiting vehicle. His journey into hell had begun. The officers, under the command of Josiah Kipkurui Rono, transported him to their offices on University Way, opposite the Central Police Station, a nondescript building that hid chambers of unspeakable cruelty. The interrogation started immediately, a relentless barrage designed to break the spirit. Rono and his team demanded a confession. Details of Raila's alleged involvement in the coup, names of co-conspirators, anything to justify the regime's vengeance. When Raila refused, insisting on his innocence, the violence erupted. Rono snapped off the leg of a wooden table and brought it crashing down on Raila's head and shoulders with savage force. Blow after blow rained down, each one sending shockwaves of blinding pain through his body. Dazed and collapsing to the floor, Raila was then set upon by the officers, who jumped on his chest and genitals, their boots grinding into his flesh. "You will speak, or you are dead meat," Rono snarled, cocking his pistol for emphasis. The assault left Raila gasping, his vision blurred, his body a map of bruises and welts. This was no mere beating. It was a calculated destruction of the man, orchestrated by a regime desperate to eliminate threats. From there, Raila was shuttled between Mathangari Police Station, GSU headquarters, and CID offices, the torture continuing in waves. One night, Commissioner of Police Ben Gethy himself appeared, reeking of alcohol and gnawing on a roasted goat leg. He ordered Raila to write a statement, only to tear it up in rage when it implicated Attorney General Charles Njanjo, a rival within the regime. Over 6 grueling weeks, Raila penned statement after statement, each under duress, as interrogators twisted his words. To heighten the torment, he was confined in a cold, waterlogged cell, his sweater and shoes confiscated. The water rose to his ankles, forcing him to lean against the slime-covered walls for fleeting moments of rest, only to jolt awake from the piercing chill. "That is when I learned how long the night is," Raila would later reflect in his autobiography, The Flame of Freedom. The psychological warfare was as brutal as the physical. Isolation bred despair, and the constant threat of death loomed like a shadow. By late 1982, Raila and 2 co-accused, Professor Alfred Otieno and Otieno Makanyango, faced 13 charges of treason, a capital offense. They were remanded in custody, thrown into solitary cells with barely any sunlight penetrating the bars. A single light bulb burned incessantly, day and night, robbing them of natural rhythms. Issued one threadbare blanket for sleeping and another for cover, they wore tattered uniforms marked with a bold C for capital offender, the fabric torn scandalously between the legs. Their diet was a mockery: half-cooked ugali and watery vegetables with limp leaves, served sporadically. Twice a day, they were escorted individually to filthy toilets, forbidden from speaking or even glancing at one another. Warders spied on each other to enforce the silence, turning the prison into a web of paranoia. For 2 weeks, no showers were allowed, leaving their bodies caked in grime and sweat. The trial loomed, but on March 24, 1983, the day before it was to begin, Chief Justice Sir James Wicks entered a nolle proska at the prosecution's request. Freedom seemed tantalizingly close, but as Raila stepped out of the courtroom, Provincial Police Chief Philip Kalonzo served him with a detention order signed by Internal Security Minister Justice Ole Tipis. Indefinite detention without trial under the public security regulations, a colonial-era tool Moe wielded like a blade. Raila was whisked to Committee Maximum Security Prison's isolation block, a prison within a prison, where the real horrors awaited. Responsible for this descent were the pillars of the regime. President Moe himself, who saw Raila as a symbol of the Odinga family's enduring opposition. The special branch torturers like Rono, and high officials like Gethi and Tipis, who executed the orders with ruthless efficiency. In those early months, Raila's body bore the fresh scars of brutality. Swollen head from the table leg blows, aching ribs from the stomps, but the deeper wounds were to his soul, as the regime sought to erase him from Kenya's narrative. Transferred to Committee's isolation wing, Raila entered a world engineered for human erosion. The cells were dank fortresses of concrete, pitch black save for the occasional flicker from a distant bulb. Flooded with water deliberately poured in through vents, the floors became treacherous swamps, forcing inmates to stand for hours or risk hypothermia. Raila's cell was a tomb. No bed, no mattress, just the cold floor and 2 ragged blankets. Ventilation ducts alternated blasts of icy air and scorching, dusty heat, designed to disorient and weaken. Food arrived infrequently. Stale porridge infested with cockroaches, worm-ridden beans, and watery kales that barely sustained life. Starvation was a weapon, leaving Raila emaciated, his once robust frame hollowed out. Solitary confinement was the cruelest cut. For months on end, Raila saw no one but his guards, who communicated only in grunts or threats. He was denied books initially, though later allowed censored religious texts like the Bible and Quran. To survive the madness, he devised routines. Pacing the cell for exercise, tending a small vegetable garden when permitted, reciting poetry and songs from memory. But the isolation gnawed relentlessly. He learned of his mother's death months after the fact, the news delivered coldly by a warder, with no chance to mourn or attend her funeral. Family visits were forbidden. His wife, Ida, and young children became ghosts in his mind. He would not see his son, Raila Jr., until the boy was 9 years old, a theft of fatherhood that inflicted wounds deeper than any beating. The torture persisted, though subtler now. At Nyayo House, the regime's infamous torture center, built with public funds for this very purpose, Raila endured sessions that blurred into nightmares. Blindfolded and stripped, he was chained to a chair while interrogators, led by figures like James Opio and others, demanded more confessions. Beatings came with whips, rubber hoses, and wooden batons. Cigarettes were stubbed out on skin, and needles pierced sensitive areas. One method, the swimming pool, involved flooding the cell to chest height, leaving him to shiver in the dark, exhausted, and collapsing into the filth. Psychological ploys amplified the horror. Piped-in cries of women and children mimicked his family's suffering, breaking his resolve in ways physical pain could not. Female torturers, often described as light-skinned with Kikuyu accents, added humiliation. Fondling, threatening circumcision with razor blades, burning genitals with smoldering cigarettes. Raila's injuries mounted. The initial head trauma from Rono's assault evolved into chronic headaches, a buildup of fluid that years later would be diagnosed as hydrocephalus, requiring emergency surgery. His left eye, struck during a beating, developed a persistent teariness, a visible scar of the regime's savagery. Bruises on his chest and genitals faded, but the pain lingered, a constant reminder of vulnerability. Moved between prisons, Manyani's brutal colonial-era notoriety, Naivasha's overcrowded hell, Shimo La Tewa's coastal isolation. The conditions varied little. Overcrowded cells meant sleeping in shifts, wading through urine and feces to reach overflowing toilets. Lice, fleas, and diseases like scabies and malaria ravaged bodies unchecked. Medical care was aspirin for everything or nothing at all. Throughout, the architects of this suffering remained the same: Moi inner circle. The president, paranoid after the coup, authorized the crackdowns, viewing Raila as a proxy for his father's KPU legacy. Special branch officers like Rono and Opio executed the tortures, while ministers like Tipis and police chiefs like Kalonzo enforced the detentions. Nyayo House stood as a monument to their depravity, its basements echoing with the screams of hundreds. Students, academics, soldiers, rounded up post-coup. Raila shared this fate with figures like Titus Adangosi, who died mysteriously in prison, or Mena wa Kenyati, subjected to similar degradations. For nearly 6 years, from 1982 to 1988, Raila endured this abyss, his spirit tested but unbroken, a testament to resilience amid engineered despair. Even after his release on February 5, 1988, Raila's ordeal was far from over. The regime, fearing his influence, rearrested him within months, plunging him back into the cycle of detention in 1988 to 1989 and again in 1990 to 1991. Each stint revisited the horrors. Solitary in Comedia's special block for psychologically disturbed prisoners, where he was cuffed permanently, denied writing materials, and fed slop unfit for animals. The waterlogged cells returned, the beatings sporadic but vicious, kicks to the groin, slaps that rang in his ears. Psychological torment intensified. Guards taunted him with news of outside crackdowns, whispering of assassinations planned for him. The cumulative injuries defined Raila's existence. Beyond the hydrocephalus and teary eye, he carried psychological scars, nightmares of drowning in flooded cells, phantom pains from cigarette burns. Denied family contact, he mourned lost years with his children. The emotional void a torture in itself. Amnesty International decried his plight, adopting him as a prisoner of conscience, but the regime dismissed such calls, labeling detainees as subversives. Responsible remained the unyielding Moi apparatus. The president, who built Nyayo House for torture. Torturers like Rono, whose blows left lasting damage. And enablers like Gethi, whose interrogations sowed seeds of despair. Raila's releases, in 1989 and 1991, came amid international pressure, but the horrors lingered, shaping a man who would rise to challenge tyranny. As we mourn Raila Odinga's passing on this day in 2025, his story is a tribute to unquenchable freedom. The horrors he endured, nearly a decade of detention's grip, forge a legacy of endurance, reminding Kenya of the cost of liberty. Though his body bore the regime's marks, his spirit ignited the flame that burns eternal.